Hello, everyone. This is Melissa Lentz. I'm the Director of Education at OSEG, and I'd like to welcome you to our webcast today, during which we will discuss how do you ensure your controls are effective. This webinar takes a deep dive into the critical task of controls verification, the assurance that controls are operating as designed with an acceptable level of maturity. It is a key play in the game and an important building block for success. OSEG has recently released the Controls Performance Verification Playbook with the sponsorship of ACL Services to provide you with some essential guidance and tools for best practices. Just like a football playbook, this document outlines the steps to take or plays and sets up the structure for assuring that your controls are performing the job they were designed to do. In this webinar, we will walk you through the playbook and how to use it, and then take a look at how leading technologies can take the process of controls performance verification to the next level, offering a less labor-intensive and more streamlined process with more actionable insights. So today we are joined by the following presenters: Phil Shomura, Senior Product Manager with ACL, and Carol Switzer, OSEG President. We're very pleased to have these presenters here with us today. But before we begin, I'd like to take a minute or two just to go over a few housekeeping notes. First, regarding continuing education credit. We provide NASBA-approved CPE credit to you if you have an OSEG All Access Pass, which you can purchase individually or as part of a company subscription. The All Access Pass includes many benefits in addition to CPE credit for webcasts, such as access to all OSEG resources and on-demand education series. So if you don't already have a pass, I would encourage you to check it out on the OSEG site. If you do have an all-access pass and would like a certificate of completion for CPE for this event, please be sure to stay with us for the entire hour and to answer all the polls. These are requirements for receiving CPE credit for this event. Second, regarding the recording from this webcast. In a couple of days, we will have the recording of this event posted on the OSEG website. Just log into the site and go to the Events tab and select this webcast. The recording may be viewed by anyone with an all-access pass. Third, regarding upcoming events and activities, please watch your email for announcements from OSEG about other upcoming webinars. You may view information about these upcoming webcasts on the OSEG site. So today we will address the following learning objectives. We will outline the challenges in controls performance verification, define the key steps and information needed for assurance, and describe the benefits of controls verification technology solutions. But before we get started, we'd like to offer you the first poll question. And again, please remember that if you'd like to receive CPE credit for this event, that you need to make sure you answer all the polls. So the first poll question is, do you have an OSEG All Access Pass, which is a paid membership, and would you like to receive CPE credit for this event? So while you are answering this poll question, I'd like to hand things over to our panelists to begin our discussion today.
Thanks, Melissa. Phil, I'm really happy to have you with us today. We're going to spend some time discussing the playbook that we created together with ACL. But before we begin, I just want to talk a little bit about why we thought it was important to provide the tools that are set out in this playbook. We find that in many organizations, there are a wide range of controls beyond the, technology controls that may have an ongoing monitoring or verification system. All other aspects of controls, ranging from things that need to be done manually to training that's provided, controls of all types, very often are left to their own devices, or in many organizations may be reviewed on a wide periodic basis. But a lot of organizations struggle with really being able to provide assurance that the controls that they have put in place are actually operating as designed and that they have an acceptable level of maturity to address the risk or concern for which they have been designed. So what we have done in the playbook is to provide you with 4 core play sheets or tools that can be used. And we're going to go through each of those today. These are examples. They're templates that you can take and modify and use within your own organization, or even used for the purpose of discussion as you design your control verification process. The first is a control deviation ranking tool that outlines a decision tree for ranking different risks, ranking the identified deviations and the risks that those types of deviations present. So we're giving you some guidance on how you might prioritize and then be able to set action triggers based on a review of your historical data and use that going forward. The second is an operational performance review sheet, and that's a document that can be used to track information with regard to each individual control as you review it. The third is a concept view of an operational verification overview, a sheet that gives you a way to have a high-level view across a range of controls so that you can begin to prioritize the nature of deviations that you're seeing, or also be able to see patterns and go back and look for root causes related to those patterns. And then the last is an example of a maturity assessment tool, a scoring mechanism for assessing how mature you are in managing each control and identifying gaps in how each is managed going forward. Now, you also, recognize that not every control needs to be managed at the same level of maturity, and that is why you're going to go back to that ranking process and deciding how important each control is in terms of building a higher level of maturity. But together, these four tools will, I think, really help you move through the process of establishing a strong verification system. So I'm going to start by giving a little bit of detail about our first tool, the control deviation ranking tool. So here you see it's really kind of just a question flow. You're going to look at the data on a business process and the controls that are in place for it. So you would take, for example, the first deviation event and determine, does this event have a significant impact on the reliability of the control? If it doesn't, it's really just what we would call a noise incident, and you probably don't need to take it any further in the analysis. But if it does have some significant impact on the reliability of the control, you're going to then ask, is an identified significant risk affected? Something that you already have determined through your risk assessment process is a significant concern to the organization or to the project, whatever level it is that you're seeking to evaluate. If you're not sure, you're going to ask, are any key risk indicators triggered? If you're not sure about that, you're going to look at whether any significant operations are affected. But if any of these you would answer yes to, then you're probably going to want to treat that as a major or critical deviation. And if the answer to all of those is no, you're going to treat it more as a minor deviation. And as you establish your process, you'll have a different response for a minor versus a major or critical deviation. I want to go a little deeper into this with you, Phil, about how you go about really addressing the data that you have and going through this process.
Sure. Thanks, Carol. Actually, if we could just go back to the previous slide for just a quick moment. Yeah, I might echo, I would like to echo some of what Carol's already mentioned. It's, in practice, the litmus test of your audit or compliance posture is really making sure that, that your controls are actually working as intended. And this is incredibly challenging when performed manually, and it becomes also unreliable if performed in a sample or spot test type of methodology. But technology can help by automating much of the mundane and repetitive, not to mention labor and time-intensive steps. Technology can also help surface exceptions and issues much more efficiently and accurately than through traditional manual efforts. One example is the application of data analysis. So data analysis can help streamline the assessment of control effectiveness, particularly when you can query and examine entire data sets to test for a wide range of types of potential control breakdowns. Although control assessments are usually performed on a periodic basis, sometimes, as Carol said, maybe too far, the cadence between testing them is too far. The best scenario would be where key controls are monitored using ongoing automated techniques. So based on findings unearthed through a continuous monitoring model, as I just suggested, you can better understand how your controls are performing against acceptable limits and make the appropriate improvements or modifications in real time. So, and we'll just advance to the next slide. Yep. So I'd like to run through these 6 steps, but before that first step of plotting your data, you need to first source the data. So really the very, very first step is to collect, compile, standardize, and harmonize the data so you can compare from disparate systems and sources. This might involve connecting to multiple databases and taking a look at numerous fields within different tables, something that's far beyond what can be reasonably done through manual processes. By doing this, this allows you to test against a wider range of criteria in a highly efficient manner to identify anomalous activity. And with the right technology, you can apply not only rule-based data analysis to test your controls, but also machine learning, which is an emerging technology, to help identify patterns or trends that you otherwise wouldn't know to really look for. So with the data in hand, let's go through that first step of plotting your data. So step 1, it's about visualizing the data, because it's really critical to do that so you can understand where your outliers or anomalies lie across your control tests. Step 2, when control deficiencies are identified, it's important to respond quickly by validating each one and ruling out potential false positives. Step 3, if you see trends that don't make sense, this is the time to take measures to revise controls if they need calibrating to point out true issues and stop popping out false positives. Step 4, particularly for organizations looking to set acceptable thresholds, understanding anomalies, no matter how you do it, serves as an excellent barometer to determine what normal actually looks like, making it much easier for you to set control limits for future testing. Step 5, after issues are verified, investigation and remediation is required. Technology can help streamline this by triggering workflows the moment a control limit is exceeded so that the right people are notified and escalation begins based on a number of preset rules that you've set in the system. And as best practice, as I mentioned before, you shouldn't do this as a test once and revisit in 3 to 6 to 9 to 12 months. Really, it's about being able to automate and set a recurring schedule for data analysis to really help strengthen and validate that your improved control processes are effective over time. It's really more of a proactive approach to that. And finally, technology can help by centrally tracking your responses to control deficiencies, giving you superior oversight to ensure prompt action is always being taken. So those are the 6 steps. And I see we have the discussion questions here.
Yeah, but Phil, before we get into these questions, I actually have, I want to take a step back because I have a couple questions from the audience that I think it would be helpful to answer at this point.
Sure.
One person asked, first of all, can you just give a few examples of what a control deviation, what that might be in different types of controls? And the other person asks, is this a binary answer? It's either working or not, or could there be different levels or different types of deviations identified for a control?
I'll answer the second question first. I think it really depends on the organization, how black and white you are. I think smaller organizations have the flexibility to be a little bit more black and white, whereas large organizations where the controls are multifaceted would need a little bit more investigation. I think the best practice is to set the control to be a little bit more strict so that once it does pop up, it gives you the opportunity to jump on it and determine whether it is indeed something that needs to be you need to be concerned with, or you can just set it, you can cast it aside as being, a situation that that maybe requires a little bit more training, or indeed is not an issue at all. So maybe setting the filter to be a little bit more strict first, and catching everything, and then being able to dismiss certain ones is probably a good practice to catch everything and not letting anything fall through the cracks. In terms of the first question, an example of a control deviation could be something as simple as segregation of duties, whether it's financial operations or IT. Think of, is the person signing the check the same person that cut the check for the vendor that you're trying to pay? Is the person that's authorizing, in IT, authorizing access to server rooms or applications the same person that perhaps is purchasing the software or has the ability to use that application for maybe some fraudulent means, right? So there's different ways to take a look at control limits and deviations, and really it depends on the context of what controls you're trying to test.
Right. And I assume you may have different acceptable levels of deviation that you've established. So, for example, if there's a logbook, an inspection logbook, say, for a hazardous material storage area, and someone's supposed to inspect it and sign that logbook every day, each time there's a missing signature, that is a deviation event. But you might have 365 days, and you have 2 days where you have that deviation, right? Mm-hmm. So that doesn't mean the control isn't working, black and white, but you may have established a standard saying, we need this particular control needs to be 100%, or maybe it's 95%.
Yeah, that's correct, and really it's about your acceptable your risk appetite, right? So if it's 100 days and 2 days there's no signature, that's a 98% achievement rate for that control. If your threshold is 95%, then we can say that is still black and white. 95%, anything above 95% is acceptable, right? Anything below 95% is unacceptable. So that is binary in that sense. It really is. It's contextual to the situation and how you set your controls.
Right. So, in this first tool, we talked about capturing and analyzing control deviations as a first step. But in your experience, do you see that actually being done regularly? And if not, how are people establishing control limits and control deviation limits, or are they not doing it?
I wouldn't be so naive to suggest that none are. I know from my experience that people have homegrown tools, or they're actually using technology today to do that. But by and large, I still do meet a lot of people at conferences, at trade shows, and even customers that have joined ACL who say they were stuck in the Excel and SharePoint world, where SharePoint was their method of collaboration, which hit or miss. I'm not a SharePoint fan for many reasons, but that's their tool for collaborating with different stakeholders across different departments, and they use Excel as the tool to input, on one side of the ledger their regulations or standards that they need to comply with, and then on the right ledger it would be the controls that they're mapping to, and it becomes a very manual exercise of checking each cell to make sure that yes, this control was performed, and working down the list. The problem with that is that Excel typically traps information it's very static, and if nobody knows where it is, well, nobody can access that same document. It might live with the author and never make it into the hands of anybody else. And version control is also a big issue. Now, what are people doing about establishing control limits? Well, I'm not in the world where people are not using technology and still doing things manually. Unfortunately, it is all about sample testing, and as a sample test, you're only seeing what you test, right? So if you're taking a sample size of 25 or 30 or 50, 100, whatever it is, that's your sample size. But if the 110th, or for example, unit proves to identify a control breakdown, well, you didn't test that 110th. You only went up to 100, right? So you're somewhat playing with fire, but it really again depends on your appetite for risk. If you're confident and you can live with sample testing, there are a lot of people who are resource strapped, both money and human resource-wise, that force them into that space where that's the tool that they use right now. That's their methodology, and at least they're testing. But could they elevate their practice? For sure. Technology always helps with that, and it's just a matter of that maturity curve and where they are in that maturity curve.
Yeah. So resources is a big reason preventing this analysis being done on a more regular basis. Do you think that in your conversations with people, they understand that this is an important task, but they just can't keep up with it because of resource limitation? Or is there a lack of understanding as well?
No, I don't think there's a lack of understanding. I think people are generally very smart. They're very conscientious, and they want to be able to have that airtight control testing system. But like I said, one problem with performing analysis, detailed data analysis, is one, resource constraints, and number two, there is a lack of data scientists within organizations sometimes, and without that data scientist, they feel that they can make analysis work in their favor. But with what we offer, we recognize that limitation here at ACL, and what we do is we make sure that we publish for our customers pre-built analytic scripts right out of the box, so they can actually start using them for anything from financial to operations to IT, and get running right off the ground running, and start using those and kind of catching those low-hanging fruits, and really get a taste of the value and the power of data analytics without needing that data scientist in-house. Yeah.
So we have so much to cover. I'd like everybody to answer poll 2 while we continue our conversation. You can see it in your sidebar panel. When establishing control limits in your organization, which one of these areas, which is the top one that you think could be most improved by applying technology? So really, which one do you struggle with the most if you're doing it manually? Visualizing the data to spot trends, investigating the root cause of control limit breaches, revisiting and revising the control limits periodically by reviewing new data, and or triggering remediation workflows when a control limit is breached. And if you don't have an opinion about it or you don't know, you can select that answer as well. So I want to move to our next tool, which is the Operational Performance Review Summary. This one is pretty straightforward. You just want to have some sort of template or structure within which you can track the findings from your control review for each individual control and be able to record, important information. So you want to, what's the control number? When is it scheduled to have a review? Maybe you want to include a little description of the procedure. Maybe you can see here there are little footnotes on each of these items, and when you go to the playbook itself, you'll see that there's more detailed either answer choices or guidance on how to, fill out each of these. And it's important for you to provide that, whether it's exactly the same instructions that we suggest or modified, because you want consistency. You don't just want to say, tell me the status of this control and have everybody writing in, free form types of answers. And then you want to be able to also record the responses. All of this information is really critical to being able to provide an audit trail. I'm going to let Phil give you an example of what this looks like when you do it within a technology system, that it gives you a little, better support around the viewing of these different types of fields.
Sure, thanks, Carol. So this is a screenshot of a portal in our system where control owners can see details related to control they own. In practice, this control would have been assigned to them for testing and execution. So by control, and you're just looking at one right now, you can manage each one individually. And as maybe the director of audit, I would delegate the task to the frontline to take greater ownership over areas in their domain. So where they're responsible for ensuring the performance of controls in their department or process area, you can get the assurance you need that those specific control activities are being performed consistently. You can also evaluate how a particular control is performing by sending questionnaires to frontline staff on a specified schedule or cadence and aggregate those responses after the fact for analysis. The evidence you collect helps to inform control testing and determine whether or not the control is operating effectively. And control tasks can also be assigned to anyone, including non-system users. So it doesn't have to be someone within your organization. It could be a third-party vendor that you're doing contract work with, that you're outsourcing services to. And so that really makes it easier for them to respond to self-assessment requests. And I'll have a chance to actually show this live through a demo later on. So don't worry too much if you can't see exactly how this works. I'll be clicking through this in a little bit. Carol?
Great. Yeah, that's great. So the other thing that is obviously greatly supported if you're doing this in a technology system is being able to have an overview, right? Because you might have, tens of thousands of controls operating in your organization. And so you don't just want a stack of all of those papers that you've sent out to everybody from the prior tool. You want to be able to have an overview. And in particular, you want to be able to, get an idea of how scheduled and overdue tasks are piling up and how they relate to each other so that you can address resource needs. You want to be able to see how related processes may be affected. You want to be able to identify the responsible parties across the board. There's a lot of different views you might take if you're overseeing this process to go, I'm seeing a lot of overdue tasks, and they all seem to be related to this same responsible party, or other sorts of relationships across the data. So, having that ability to maintain an overview and have it change in real time as information changes is really valuable. And now we're going to show you just a screenshot of how that works when you do have that overview capability in a technology structure.
Thanks, Joe. So this is a screenshot of a dashboard displaying a governing view of controls currently being tested. It's rarely as easy as maintaining a single control at a time. From an operational standpoint, it's usually about overseeing the execution of multiple controls. So in the ACL solution, you can achieve a flattened view of all controls across different projects, processes, and owners to truly understand the state of your controls at the macro level. So it's incredibly it's incredibly efficient to empower frontline staff to manage the controls they own, as I mentioned before, but frontline staff are often responsible for a lot of controls across financial, reporting, IT security, operations, the list goes on. And deciphering thousands of controls and policies can be quite burdensome, both on the frontline staff as well as at the managerial level. So this view presents control information in a super simplified and centralized view, allowing frontline operators to manage the controls they have access to and really focus on what's outstanding or what's failing. Managers and process owners can view the status of all their controls at a glance and gain insight on any aspect of a control with a single click and stay up to date on the status of their controls, design, and performance.
So the next thing that we think is really important is being able to evaluate and rank the maturity of each of your controls. And don't try to read this portion on the right. It's just an example. I'm going to blow up part of it on our next slide. But overall, we want to be able to, map each control to the risk. That's an important status capability in your control's maturity, that you can map each control to the risk or risks that it is meant to address. You want to map it to other controls in a circumstance where they may apply to the same risk or they may have an impact on each other. You want to record the frequency of operation that you've established and the triggers that might occur, events that might occur that would cause you to review the control for its design. And also triggers or criteria for escalation, when a certain level of deviation or concern about the control needs to be brought to a higher level in the organization. You want to address ownership or responsibility for the management of the control and issues around accuracy of data for that control. And let me show you, for example, if we looked at, mapping to risk, to rank the maturity of that, is the control mapped to one or more risk indicators and risk events? You might say, we're going to give you only 1 point if there's no clear mapping or mechanism for viewing the mapping easily. You might consider it a medium level if you have the control mapped to some risk indicators, but maybe not to all that are relevant. Or maybe you have them all, but you're just maintaining it in a spreadsheet. And then you would have a higher level of maturity if you map it to all the relevant risk indicators, which themselves are then mapped to the objectives that those risks relate to. And you have that ability to view this in a technology-supported report. So that, that's kind of an example of different levels of maturity. So in the form for each of these criteria, we've set out some suggested low, medium, and high maturity levels. And what you would do with this form is, rank them across and then add up those scores so that you can determine for each aspect how mature it is, and then overall for each control how mature it is. And again, this is an example of a way that you might proceed, and we're certainly pleased if you want to take this and adapt it to your organization. But there might be other ways, or you might prefer, 5 levels of maturity system and other changes. One of the things that, Phil, when you get into this, or maybe when you get into your demo, that some of our audience has asked about is this question of knowing that the data is accurate. When you're evaluating your historic data, when you're making decisions based on data, how do you really know that the data is accurate and that you've cleaned the data well? So that's something I'd ask you to address as well.
Okay.
But why don't you give us a look at your compliance maps?
Sure. So this is an example, an application of what Carol was talking about in terms of mapping, standards and regulations to true control frameworks, and it becomes incredibly difficult to do this when even if you buy technology and it basically comes with no content whatsoever to help get you started. Just really the capabilities and the functionality is there, but it's lacking in terms of the meat or the substance that you would need to really get started. And more and more you'll see that ACL is one of them. We embed and include content for control frameworks and regulations and standards that are popular and just prevalent in across different industries, whether it's banking, IT, public sector. So we make sure those are available in the system so you can actually go in and utilize them right from the get-go and kickstart your compliance programs from day one rather than needing to import them or manually enter them into the system, which you can do, but it's always more time intensive to do that and really kind of delays your time to value when you invest in certain technologies. So having said that, I speak to many industry professionals who manage compliance, and too often I hear that Excel is the most immediately accessible tool to map one's compliance obligations, whether it's regulatory or standards, with corresponding controls. It's definitely not the preferred method, but it's really what they have at their disposal, and that's what they're doing. Though well-intended in terms of making the best out of a simple tool, like I said before, Excel spreadsheets are static and they don't really allow for collaboration across different contributors. If technology can help, which you can see here, by helping to simplify the act of mapping regulations and standards with mitigated controls in a highly intuitive way. It not only allows you to map the relationships in a one-to-one or one-to-many construct, but also share this across the organization in a centralized fashion so that no matter what your role is in the organization, whether you're an external auditor, you're the chief audit executive, your compliance officer, anybody that has access to the system can see the relationships and the intention behind a compliance project. And with the visual layout that results, you can quickly and easily demonstrate coverage, but also identify outstanding gaps that you need to address. So you've got these 80% of things covered. What are you going to do about this next 20% that you still have gaps around? So for full illustration purposes, I've chosen the kovat framework, and you see that right here in this slide. So with the kovat framework here, what you see is the entire framework with the parent requirements as well as the sub-requirements listed here, and you can expand these as you wish. If we move to the next slide. So let's say we chose one of the parent requirements, MEA01. So you see here the parent requirement, the ID, the title, and the description of the control. In terms of status, you can choose to define this as applicable to your organization or not applicable. Not all controls are always applicable to every organization. So if you click no, you have a chance to enter in the rationale there why this is not applicable, why you don't feel you need to map and mitigate a control to this particular requirement. But should it be applicable, you can click on yes, and you'll obviously want to click on covered to say that you are going to do something to demonstrate coverage. And if you do click yes, well, then you need to map the control to that to complete that story. So when you click map controls, we have a library, and it's a growing library of control frameworks that you can choose from. Let's say we chose something from the ITGC framework for the purposes of this illustration. So we choose that, and what you'll see on the next screen, you'll see those particular controls that you identified already mapped here and included in this in the window for this particular requirement. So here I've chosen two separate controls that are now tied and mapped and related back to this requirement. And this is what you can demonstrate to auditors or regulators that you've made the intentional effort to identify mitigating controls. And not only that, but you have an ongoing test of this control to figure out whether it passes or fails, or whether it's not tested at all, or if there's issues related to it. So once that's established, what you'll see is you'll see a green check mark to signify that there is a mapping of this control, of particular controls, to this requirement to demonstrate coverage, and your assurance is 100%. So you do that across all the different the requirements that you're looking to demonstrate coverage for. And it's a pretty easy, intuitive way to do it. And it makes it really easy for the organization to demonstrate coverage.
Yeah, so it's great that you can start with a library of, widely applicable controls. And how can someone also, I assume they can add their own established controls, right? They can customize in addition to what's already in the library.
For sure, yeah. What we try to do is make sure that it's available for customers to use right out of the gate, so that some of the more established ones, whether it's PCI, kovat, CSA, NIST, HIPAA, GDPR, those are all in our system already. But where there are maybe internal policies that a company has set up, well, obviously that's not published in the open domain, so they are free to enter those in and bulk load those in themselves, and it will behave much in the same way as this. It just requires that little bit of pre-work to enter it into the system beforehand.
Yeah.
And any of these that are pre-populated, they can further be customized. So if there's customizations that anybody wants to make that for the control frameworks or the standards or regulations that are already in the system, they can do that as well.
Terrific. Okay, so let's move on. You've done a pretty good job, I think, of already telling us how these steps are handled in the purpose-built technology, but maybe we can just summarize again, or in a little more detail, some of the real advantages of using a technology structure rather than a real manual or Excel-style management of the process.
Yeah, so in my experience, pardon me. In my experience, the biggest advantages of using purpose-built technology for control performance verification is really in the ability to automate a lot of things that were previously time and effort intensive to do. It takes away a lot of the manual chasing after people, the manual email trails that need to be kept. So it increases traceability, reduces time and effort. It centralizes a lot of the work stream so that anybody, no matter where it is in the work stream, can get a good idea of what's going on and have that audit trail. And of course, having a system that tracks everything instantly makes you audit ready. So really your audit posture and your compliance posture is pretty on point to be ready for any investigations or external reviews. And that really does help to trim down a lot of the panic and time spent on scrambling to find all the documentation to prove that that you're compliant with a particular regulation, or that your controls are helping you to be compliant with a particular regulation or standard.
Yeah, and definitely helps internal audit and external audit teams really gain, actionable information and a clear view without such huge expenditure of resource and burden on the business operations. So we have a couple more things we want to cover here. So I thought the first thing would be, it might be fun for you to give us a bit of a live demo in the technology and just go a little bit deeper. And maybe just leave a few minutes at the end for us to talk about the technology checklist that we've also included in the ebook, or the playbook.
So yeah, if you can just pass me control, I'll go do that.
Yeah. So you can just go to share.
See my screen? Oh yes, of course.
Share your screen.
There we go.
Here we go.
How's that? Perfect. So just a little bit before I step into this demo, so the goal is really to move from a retroactive to a proactive nature when looking at the proper execution and assessment of control effectiveness. As I mentioned before, it's efficient to empower frontline staff to manage the controls that they own, but when they're responsible for a large number of controls, it's challenging to get that governing view to know where things are falling short. And a feature in the ACL product called Control Performance, which I'll show you in a little bit, allows you to easily set up a schedule to ensure that a control is being performed consistently, accurately, and effectively every time. When performing your design assessments, typically you're meeting with different control owners or policy owners or procedure owners individually. It's time-consuming and inefficient. But with control performance, you can automate this entire process by sending notifications to control owners to review controls with a direct link within the system and have them respond in kind as to whether the control is, 1, effective, or 2, requires further modifications. You're simply automating the job of overseeing that control owners are doing the work that they need to do and make the necessary corrections to ensure controls are designed effectively with not a lot of training, frankly, on their part. The tool is pretty simple to use. And we mentioned before, controls, it should never be a do it once and forget about it exercise. They need to be tested on a regular cadence. So how do you do that? How do you reduce your workload but ensure that that cadence is kept to identify when things are falling out of acceptable parameters? So control performance allows you to preset these notifications such that they automatically get sent out to the right person at the right intervals with a reminder should they fail to respond back. It's essentially taking what you would do normally in a manual way with all the chasing and all the emails that you send out and automate it times however many controls owners you have to normally reach out to check in. So let me show you how this works. So what you see here is a list of compliance projects. I'll just click on this first one, the COVID IT assessment. And so,
hey, Phil,
yes.
I see a little bit of a gray box covering part of your picture. I don't know if that's something you can move, sort of in the middle at the bottom there. You don't see it?
Middle? No, I don't.
Okay.
I apologize for what that might be. I don't see what that is on my screen.
It's not that big, so we won't worry about it.
Okay, I'll just continue. So if you go into the field work here, you'll see the processes that you're wanting to test against in this compliance project. We'll go into one of these, logical access, and we'll take a look at the risk and control matrix. And here you can see the risks that we've cataloged in the context of this IT assessment, along with a number of controls, mitigating controls that help mitigate obviously those risks. And what we've done is we've already associated a number of these controls with this risk. Some are a one-to-one relationship, some are many to one. So if we want to see which of these controls have actually been assessed and executed and tested, we can go into here to take a look right here. You'll see the status of it. You'll see that some of these have been tested and confirmed as being designed appropriately. Some have not been started. So let's take a look at this one right here, LA008. If we go in here, you'll see the control ID as well as the description. But obviously, because nothing's been done, you'll have nothing in terms of walkthrough results. You won't have an assessment of whether it's designed properly or not. You won't have any supporting files. So we really need to get started on getting this one tested. So control performance is what we talked about before. You can set a schedule to ensure that the notifications are getting out to the appropriate person, the assigned person, to make sure that the test is being performed on a cadence that you've set. So right here you can send out a questionnaire. Obviously, this is our staging environment, so we don't have too many questionnaires, but in practice, there should be a library of questionnaires you can send out. So I'm going to just choose this one because it's the only one. And here, you can type in a title. Oops. And then you can send it to anybody within the system, but if, like I said, you can send it out to someone that's not within your organization, maybe a third-party vendor. So I'm just going to enter a personal email address to demonstrate that you can do that as well. And you can enter in instructions for what needs to be done for this particular procedure. And so it could be as detailed step-by-step procedures as you want, or it could be a further expansion on the description of the control test. And this is where really I want to focus is the ability to set a frequency for this questionnaire to be sent up to this person, which is me. So you can set it to be daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, or a custom time. Well, let's say this is going to be weekly. And you can set a date, let's say Monday at 9 a.m., and you can set a time zone. You can also send the questionnaire immediately, but that would be a one-time thing. But what we want to do is set a regular frequency of sending this notification out. So once I send that out, what does it look like from a reporting standpoint? What does it look like from the other side of the cap, the person receiving it, or how it would look for me once these have all been sent out and I want to monitor the progress of it? So that's something we call mission control. And what you see here is when you have multiple controls, how do you achieve that aggregate view? So this module gives you a flattened view of all your controls across different projects, processes, and owners. And you can actually use these same criteria to filter to find what you're looking for. So I'm going to filter and go by that same project. So these are all the controls that pertain to this particular compliance project. So though your control owners can only use this as a portal to see what they are assigned, a more senior member can filter through everything and see everything. I could clear this and see all the projects again. But if I'm only assigned controls specific to the 2018 COVID IT assessment, I would only see the ones pertaining to that. Hope that makes sense. Mm-hmm. From here, you can filter through the controls and even click on any of them to uncover the status and details in real time. So let's take a look at this first one. So this shows you for each control, the control description, the attributes, and then depending on the privileges that the control owner has, they can either execute a procedure and enter in details about the walkthrough results, and even assess the design effectiveness of the particular control. They can also change attributes and reclassify the control into maybe something else, or change any details about this, including the frequency. But what I want to focus on most importantly is, one more thing. And if you want to find out more details about the control itself, you can click into here and find out as a controller if I want to review again the title, who it's assigned to, and any procedural instructions and the frequency. I can go in here and do that. But what I want to focus on is this part. So what you see here, this was a control test that was due to be performed daily. So as you can see, there's a lot of overdue tasks, which is obviously not optimal, but there are some completed tasks. And if we go to the very end here, you can see one that's completed. Now, the responses to this question are very simple. Obviously, you would hope for more in a real-life scenario, but the premise still stands that they have to answer these questions on a daily basis as a form of confirmation to you that, number one, the test was executed, and number two, the assessment was done on the frequency that you have stipulated. And from here, you can see the different control formers, what the control is, the frequency, as well as the overdue status. And you can toggle this to show only overdue ones or all. So that's a preview into how you'd manage your control performance verification through the ACL solution.
Wow. Hey, I want to continue the conversation, but right now I just want to make sure we give everybody a chance to do our last poll. So if you can look in your the right-hand sidebar, everybody, you'll see the last poll. We want to know which of the following areas is the most important to your organization, meaning needing attention. Data access and blending, data automation workflow, storyboarding and reporting, or you don't know. And while you're doing that, the last thing I wanted us to just spend a few minutes on is the technology selection checklist. This is a list we put together as a tool for you to use if you're interviewing or reviewing or creating RFPs for technology to support controls verification. And we set out 4 high-level areas: data access and blending, data automation workflow, storyboard and reporting, and efficient resource utilization. And so I just want to ask you, Phil, maybe to touch on some of the points in this checklist that are most important. Oh, and by the way, I know that demo was really quick, and a lot of you have more detailed questions. So I'm going to suggest if you would like Phil or someone from ACL to give you a more in-depth individual demo, just put a note, send in the Q&A to say, can I please have a demo set up for me? And then we'll make sure to get that information over to Phil so he can make that arrangement for you. Phil, what do you think about, the most important things to look for or to ask about, or that companies sometimes say they have, but they mean something different than you really mean?
Yeah, thanks for that, and I do welcome any further requests for demo. I hope that gave a good little preview, but I'm happy to kind of have an individual conversation with you about that, should you wish. Now, in answering your question, Kyle, I would say that 2 key things that we do differently that I think is really important is that data access, data blending, and then the full data population data analysis. And that's really important because without being able to source the right amount of data directly from the system, and without being able to confidently say that you're analyzing the entire data population, that 1%, that 5% that you're missing in your data analysis could be the chink in the armor that takes your compliance programs down a dark path, really. So with us, we have so many data connectors that can natively connect into different systems. They can be ERP systems, they could be IT systems, they can be HR systems. And the more systems that you can connect to directly through ODBC or other means, the more rich and more contextual the information you'll have at your disposal to analyze and really sift out those exceptions and anomalies that matter most to you. And the more context you have, the more those insights will make sense and the more actionable they will be for you to take remediation steps against. And really, the more information you find, the more exceptions that you find, the more you'll want to really be able to automate the remediation steps and the workflow that follows. So it's really important also to have that data automation workflow component tied to the data analytics so that it works in a very fluid and continuous manner to kind of allow you to focus less on the digging around for the exceptions and more on the strategic initiatives you're taking to apply corrective actions to deviations and exceptions. So that's what I would say about these 4.
That's great. That's great, Phil. Well, we're at the top of the hour. I'm really pleased that everyone stuck with us for what was a very fast-paced but also very deep and interesting discussion. I appreciate all the detail, Phil, very much. Everybody, please remember you can go to the OSEG website, go to the resources area, and you will see the playbook available for you to download. At this time, you do not need to be an All Access Pass member to download this playbook. ACL has, through its sponsorship, made it available to you, even if you're just a basic member. So you'll find it there along with many other resources. And you can also download the slides. But if you want a better view of each of the play sheets, you'll get that by downloading the playbook. We have some other interesting webinars coming up over the next few weeks, including a review of our survey results from our GRC Technology Strategy Survey in the middle of February. So I'd also encourage you to go to the events page and sign up for that and other webinars. And I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.